that Russia made in the year 2001, they included the feature called Lomonosov Ridge. And they claimed continental shelf as Lomonosov as a part of these, as a submarine elevation, which is a part of the natural prolongation of the continental margin itself. And therefore, the extension was right up to the North Pole. Now, the question is, what is the ridge? Now, there is geopolitics involved in this. In the first place, in some of the meetings of the Commission, and I was the Secretary of the Commission for many years, the question was raised because the term appears in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, it is for the lawyers to decide. The lawyers took the stand that the term ridge is a very technical term and has to be determined by the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf itself. We'll call it CLCS or the Commission, because it's a scientific matter, and the CLCS has been specifically constituted for this purpose to deal with technical and scientific matters. Well, there was a controversy, so some of them suggested that this matter could be referred to the UN for the legal opinion. Now, the UN did not give a legal opinion on this because the UN's role is limited to giving legal opinion on procedural matters, not on substantive interpretation of the convention itself. The issue was whether they can go to ITLOS. Now, whether they can take an advisory opinion on this issue. Again, no particular decision was taken on this. The problem is that there is no such provision in the convention, and the recommendations of the CLCS are also not subject to a judicial review because there is no such provision in the convention at all. It becomes completely the state's sovereign rights to implement the recommendation or to revise it and submit a new one, or to do a fresh submission. Now, the thing was whether this could be raised in the meeting of the states parties. Now, there are two views about the role of the meeting of states parties itself. That's why I started with saying that the meeting of the states parties itself becomes kind of a political forum. And when it comes to geopolitics, here the role is important because there are three provisions in the convention which specifically provide for the role of the meeting of the states parties. And those three provisions relate, one, to the election of the Commission on the members of the continental shelf. The second one is election to members of ITLOS, the judges. And the third relates to the financial aspect, the budget of the ITLOS. Now, therefore, there are some interpretations which say that the role of the meeting of states parties is related to only these three issues and not related to the issues relating to interpretation of substantive matters of the convention. So this, again, is living like that. And now, what has happened is, there are three submissions in the Arctic. What Russia did, after they got the recommendations of the CLCS, they were obviously dissatisfied with it. And we know the events that followed, the assertion of sovereignty, planting of the titanium flag and things like that, and the protests that all came. And the protests were more in the nature of opposing the assertion of sovereignty there. There was no mention about these sovereign rights over the resources involved. That part of it was left. Now, Russia, in accordance with the procedures of the Commission, made a revised submission, which again includes additional data and information about the Lomonosov Ridge and considers that as a part of the submarine elevation. Now, this is currently under consideration by the Commission. There are two other submissions which deal with this very part, and there are overlapping claims on the Lomonosov Ridge itself. One is that by Canada, and the other one is northern Greenland with Denmark. These are also submissions which have not yet been taken up, which will be taken up subsequently. I think the 48th submission is right now under consideration, and this one probably is the 68th, and the Canadian submission was, I think, 84th or so. So this is the issue. Now, what happens? Before I come to that, there is one more issue that is involved with the melting of the Arctic. With the melting of the Arctic, there are lots of rocks that are likely to be exposed. Now, are they rocks, or can there be claims as islands? If they are merely rocks, then they can generate only the territorial sea, not exclusive economic zone, not a continental shelf. But features of rocks may generate very large areas of continental shelf and 200 miles of exclusive economic zone, depending upon whether the rock is whether it is a rock or island. A rock that does not that does not support human inhabitation or economic life of its own cannot have exclusive economic zone or continental shelf, and that is the only definition contained in the convention. It does not define what is a rock. So this again is a issue when the submissions will be taken up, and here again nobody has yet come up with a very clear issue, clarity about this, except perhaps to some extent we have the jurisprudence in the South China Sea cases. But these are two areas that I thought I would identify. One relates to the ridges, the second relates to the issue of rock, and both will at some time or other come before the commission, and the commission will have a major role on this. And this is the only body which is the expert body which can deal with these features, and they will have to have this thing. So what then is the next step? The next step is that from India's perspective, I would believe that India is not having a member in the CLCS at the moment. The last election was held in 2017. The next election is going to take place in 2022. And this will probably be before the 14th of June because a new commission takes up its office on the 15th of June 2022. So it is important that India should nominate a candidate for the CLCS, because in the CLCS, because the other two submissions will also come up, it would be useful if they also become member of this subcommission that would deal with the submission of both Canada and Denmark in respect of Greenland. What will then happen is, as a member of the CLCS, we will have a major role. So this would present an opportunity to understand also the technical other aspects that actually is involved in the Arctic. I'll stop it here. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. I took time more than.
I think we are well within our time. Thank you so much. Thank you for raising these two important issues regarding the claims from the sovereignty or economic perspective. Now we have listened to both speakers. They have given their own vision, and they raised some very important issues in the kind of policy which might be evolved either by India or other nations which are interested in the Arctic region. There will be another session where India-specific questions will be addressed. So in this session, I would like all of you to address it from a larger perspective of what the larger groupings of the nations, different groupings, how they would like to see the policy evolving from different perspectives. So now it's an open house, and we have some about 10 minutes for questions. Can we begin with the gentleman there? Yes.
I'm Surya, lawyer with the National Maritime Foundation. I have a question to Mr. S.P. Rajan. Sir, you spoke of the status of insular features, rocks and islands, and how they'll be determined by the CLCS. But don't you think it's a better option for you and DOLES to do it? One, why? Because if it's part of CLCS, only member states of the UNCLOS can have a say in it. But as part of the UN DOLES, even non-member states, US, Israel, will have a greater say in that. This is not only for the insular features, but also seabed resources. Will it be part of the ISA or will it be part of UN DOLES? Thank you.
Two questions. One is on the polar Silk Route and its follow, and the other one between China and Russia. What is good? First question is based on not only the document, but also Chinese investment in the polar infrastructure and the polar industry across China, and also its relationship with smaller countries like Denmark, Norway, their investment as a part of their larger polar infrastructure, and their Presto Dragon science. My question is, it's not a question of whether it would be when the operationalization of the polar. How do we see that? Will it reduce what dependent on Malacca, which we are hoping a lot. Will it unchoke Malacca? Then a lot of strategic thinking in the Indian Ocean would China would negate it. That's my first question: how you see Chinese investment and its influence. The second one is a possible disconnect between China and Russia. Is the PSR, the polar sea route and the northern sea route are the same, or they likely to get into a kind of a cold war, or has it already started? How do Russia sees the Chinese growing Chinese investment in the polar belt and also in Norway, Denmark, and all these countries? How does Russia see it? Whether that provides an opening for us? Will Russia look for other partners? Obviously, they are not going to go to NATO. They will not go to EU. Who will they look at if there is a cold war?
I'm Ravindra. I was the last Indian member in the CSCS, Commission on the Law of the Sea. I have a few questions to both of the speakers. The first question is that we have a lot of confusion between the scientific definition of shelf and the legal definition of shelf. I won't go into that. But my basic question over here is that most of the island countries like Iceland, Reunion Island, Ascension Island, and of course there is a confidentiality clause, so I won't go in much detail on those issues. But once an island country submits its claims, and it is proved that the country sits on a mid-ocean ridge, how do we decide its claim? Because there are problems on the scientific definition of the ridges and the submarine elevations. Most of the islands which are stationed onto the ridges, their claims are possibly not entertained. Because in that case, the claim will extend right from the north to the south. Like the mid-Atlantic ridge starts from the one end of the earth and goes to the other end. Notwithstanding that all these mid-oceanic ridges, including the Arctic slow spreading ridge, which is the world's greatest slow spreading ridge, has got maximum number of the hydrothermal deposits. Perhaps one of the most deposits that have been discovered in the last about 5 years or so. And all these deposits are very rich in the rare earth minerals, which President Grimsson has said in the morning. So how do we deal with such questions where the UNCLOS doesn't allow you to claim those areas which are sitting on the ridge, but yet the areas are thrown open for the exploration to the various countries, and also where the claims are overlapping. For example, if you see the published executive summary of Russia or Denmark, which are the two countries who have submitted their claims on the Arctic Ocean, you will find that the map that you showed, sir, the claims of the Russia extended right to the North Pole, and not going to the fact that they planted their flag right on the North Pole in 2007. And the claims of Denmark also more or less extend up to that area.
Okay.
So how do you come into this?
Your other questions, sir? This is yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation and very extensive analysis. I just want to make 3 points. It is important to understand that within the Arctic, certain nation-state entities called states in the Union, provinces in Canada, Greenland and the Danish Kingdom, the regions of Russia, they are increasingly playing a strong role on their own in the Arctic. So just to base the analysis on countries, as was done here before, is to some extent missing a part of the picture. Greenland is a very good example. You put Greenland there under Denmark, and you said EU and NATO. That's not correct. Greenland is not in the EU. It might leave NATO if it becomes independent. And increasingly, given the self-government rule of Greenland, you would be wasting your time if you only visited Copenhagen. And it's very interesting to observe how different Asian countries, China, Korea, even Malaysia, through the business activities, are positioning themselves in Greenland. In fact, talking to the government of Copenhagen. And one of the reasons why this visit to Copenhagen was not to visit the Queen, to meet the Premier of Greenland. That was his purpose. And therefore, India also faces the choice in mapping out your options and how you move forward, is how you interact with these entities, which unfortunately in the English language is very interesting. We don't have a term for it. They are, as I said, called states in the Union, in America, provinces in Canada, regions in Russia. But over 95% of the landmass in the Arctic is under federal structure. If we define Greenland, which I do, as a part of the federal, de facto federal state of the Kingdom of Denmark. So India could also develop a strategy how to interact with Alaska, for example. Forget Washington. That is what Singapore is doing. Singapore is playing an active role in the investment financial communities in Alaska. Korea put Greenland on its map more than 8-9 years ago. So as you map out all of this, this is something you need to look at. And Greenland is a very good example to illustrate this, because what has happened in the Arctic, it's an interesting political process. During the first years of my life, Alaska was mostly under federal control. It didn't become a state in the Union until somewhat later. I often tell the story of Governor Hickel, whom I met, who was twice the governor of Alaska, was Secretary of the Interior in the Nixon administration. When he was in his 20s, he went to Washington with an Alaska delegation to meet President Eisenhower. And they wanted to have statehood within the Union. And President Eisenhower looked at him and said, "Not in your lifetime, young man." Same in Greenland. Greenland was de facto colony of the government of Denmark. Then it got home rule. In 2009, it got self-government. It's been interesting for us in the Arctic Circle to see how the province of Quebec decided to play an independent role in the Arctic Circle, irrespective of what the Ottawa government was actually doing. So that's one point I would make as India moves forward. And same goes for Russia. You need to build a relationship, if you're interested in this, with different parts of Russia as well. And the second point involved in this first point is you have to respect the self-governing territorial status of many of these regions, and Greenland is again a good example. If you only talk to Copenhagen about Greenland, they would just wave you off, sort of quite frankly. You have to respect the indigenous self-governing authorities that have been established in the Arctic. And the final point I wanted to make, following what you said, in your map of India's interaction with the US, Russia, Iceland, Norway, and so on, I think you also need now to bring in the analysis of how will India interact with China, Japan, and Korea, and Singapore. Because quite frankly, probably your most active Arctic competitors will be other Asian states. And unless you figure that in your scheme and your strategy, you could get into difficulties. And unfortunately for you, especially China and Korea, are putting a huge amount of resources into their Arctic presence, both scientific presence, diplomatic presence, and business presence. And Japan is scaling up. That's why they are co-hosting the Arctic Science Ministerial meeting with Iceland in Tokyo later this year, and that's why the foreign minister of Japan traveled to the Arctic Circle Assembly, not last year, but the year before. So you always have to look to your Asian neighbors as well when you are building a policy in a certain, and I agree with you completely, that's probably the primary task of India, is to build a policy for this. But you need to bring the Asian dimension into that.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your comments and an extremely useful guidance for the purpose of future policy. We had 4 questions. We are now running out of time. The young man referred to the question of the roads, the islands and the rocks. Mr. Rajan.
There were 2 questions which I thought I could take up. One was the one which you said about the definition of rocks and islands, and whether dwellers could take up this matter. You know, the Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea is the Secretariat for the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and therefore the Secretariat usually does not go into the interpretation of this thing. As I mentioned, a point was raised whether a legal opinion could be taken, but then states parties would decide on this matter, and the states parties considered that it is their prerogative to interpret the substantive provisions of the convention. That being said, there is a study made by dwellers on the issue of islands, this and the drafting of the Article 121 of the convention. Now, this study is very elaborate. It deals right from the beginning, was what and how the island was defined, whether it was from the Geneva Conventions onwards to the entire Third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea. The entire thing has been very beautifully brought out. If you look at that study, of course, it doesn't conclude because it doesn't decide on this matter. So that study is very useful to understand what exactly is, how the developments have taken place, how states have interpreted rocks and islands, and why they have introduced this provision in Article 121, which says that rocks that cannot sustain human habitation or economic life of its own will not generate exclusive economic zone or the continental shelf. I mean, it's a kind of a negative provision there. So you will see the entire background there. If you want, I can help you out on that. The other one was that was raised about the confusion that prevails about the shelf and the scientific and legal interpretation. There, I have gone through some of the discussions that took place in the CLCS, where even the geologists and the geophysicists differ on this matter as to how the appurtenance should be decided. And also there are other areas in the scientific and technical guidelines, which you know very well, where you find the area of maximum change in the gradient. So when it comes to these complex issues, generally this is the full recommendations of the Commission is not yet available in respect of any of the recommendations made so far. Summary of the recommendations do contain certain things, but the finer analysis is not there. So one of these things that was raised was during the New Zealand and the Australian submissions, particularly in the Three Kings Ridge area. There was a lot of discussion on this thing, but if the day the full recommendations would be made public, at that time probably we'll get a little more on this. So, and as you said, confidentiality issue, because that applies to me also, having been the former this thing, so I think I'll stop it at that.
The polar sea route, Mr. Parmar.
Just to add a line to the query from Dr. Vindra is that I'm not an expert, but I can only offer you my 2 bits as a practitioner, and having looked at maritime law for 10 years, is that whenever the first decision is taken, it's going to have an effect on all further decisions. And what decision we take today, 5 to 10 years down the line, may not be seen as totally beneficial. So it has to be a very considered decision, and trying to seek a consensus on definitions will not get us anywhere. So I think it's up to the powers that be who man the CLCS chair at that time to take a decision and stick by it. All the best to them. Okay, polar silk route and China and Russia, and that's a loaded question. It's a double shotgun with 4 barrels actually. Okay, my reading is that although Russia and China are on a friendly wicket today, for the simple reason that they have, or they envisage common adversaries and common problems, Russia is not too comfortable with China entering the Arctic, especially with the investments, because Russia cannot match up today, which in a way will dilute Russia's stand in the Arctic as a major power. So that is why I don't see Russia supporting China in anything, and to my mind, I think the biggest restrictions it will put is on on Chinese ships. It's been done in the past. No reasons have been given by the Russian authorities. They are free to even say no to a ship that fulfills all conditions based on the new, whatever regulation, if you call it, that they have brought out there. So there's no disconnect between Russia and China. It's only thing that Russia will not let China develop a strong position in the Arctic as much as it can help. But then the flow of money, it can't stop out there. As far as reduction on the dependence on Malacca is concerned, you look at the nations in South China Sea. Geography can be either kind or it can be very unforgiving. And for the nations in South China Sea, which include Philippines, Vietnam, China, that's an enclosed sort of a sea. Malacca Strait is just one of the straits. Let's say it even starts taking oil from the North Sea route. Got the Strait of Bering, it's got to come past along the coast, it's got to bypass Japan and come inside. That itself will create two separate dilemmas for China. And the Malacca dilemma per se, if you ask me, and my analysis all along has been, there's never been such a dilemma. It is a rationale built up by China so that it can go ahead with its shipbuilding policies. Otherwise, ships can come from Malacca, come from Lombok, and come from Sunda. You've got three straits entering, you have an option of one. The only thing with Malacca Strait is that you bypass Singapore and therefore you bypass a US ally. And it's a little longish one. Lombok, Sunda are not as long as Malacca. So they've always had options. So that's my view on the Malacca dilemma out there. And because do remember, even if they have pipelines, or the pipeline that was mentioned, the amount of oil or gas that you can push through one pipeline is nothing compared to one VLCC can give you per day. So ships will always be the lifeline for China. And that's my rationale on this. And I think, was there anything else on that? Russia looking for partners? Well, it will always, but it has to decide whom. And thank you for your point, sir. Lack of time, but yes, we do need to consider Asian nations. And Greenland is a good example. The only thing is that we can only go back to what we knew in the Cold War days. If Greenland is a different player, then it may complicate the existing issue.
We have really finished our time, but there's only one question, time for only one question.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank the speakers as well. I'm Gudmund Eriksson. I'm Icelandic, obviously, one of the three representing our country here. I speak now as a former judge of ITLOS to comment on two statements made and following what my good colleague H.P. Rajan said, dealing with the relationship between the Commission and ITLOS. First is that the Commission is not the place to interpret the reference to rocks in Article 121.3. As we heard, the Commission specifically excludes lawyers. And this is much more of a legal question than a geological one. As we know, the South China Sea Arbitral Tribunal did very good work on the interpretation, much of which, but not all, I agree with. And secondly, as to the definition of ridges, I don't think we should know that the Icelandic claim to its extended continental shelf related to the definition of ridges, and the subcommission, as you know, colleague, accepted Iceland's claim. My daughter has written an article stating that what the Commission did subsequently was ultra vires, but that is another story. In both of these cases, I think I repeat appeals that I've made earlier, that these are topics which could be the occasion for advisory opinions of ITLOS, which it has taken upon himself and has been approved by the world community. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have your intelligence? All right. Go ahead, sir, please. No, she has permitted.
Well, I simply wanted to warn India to assume too much that there would be limitations on how Russia would engage with China in the Arctic. Because the fact of the matter is there are sanctions from the European side. There's hostility from the US side. So China is the only active partner that Russia can turn to in terms of investment, finances, and market. And that's one of the reasons why in the governmental structure of Russia, Putin changed last year the Arctic Ministry over to the Ministry of the Far East and the Arctic. So if the assumption of the Indian policy is we can relax because there's an inherent limitation to how far Russia will engage with China on this, I, as a friend of this country, would say be careful of building too much on that assumption.
Actually, we had two more questions, but I think we'll have to conclude it here. So thanks once again to both the speakers for their excellent presentations and their insights on the issue. And thank you, President Grimsson, for your very the guidance and the comments which you have provided to help us understand the issues and evolve a perspective which is useful and helpful to everyone in the region. Thank you once again, all the participants here, and for listening to us and giving time to the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rashmi, for chairing this session, and to our two panelists, Captain Parmar and Mr. Rajan, for wrapping up and getting us nearly back on time. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be going into the next technical session and not the tea break right now. So just give me 5 minutes to rearrange the table, and then we start with the last technical session of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We start with our final technical session, which explores India's engagement with the changing Arctic. Our panelists for this session are Ms. Sulagna Chattopadhyay and Dr. Subha Chandran. The session will be chaired by Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi. So, all yours. Sorry. I apologize, sir.
Good evening, greetings, Excellency President Grimsson, Director General Ragnar, Dr. Shailesh Nayak, Dr. Grasik Ravindra, Dr. Rajan, Excellencies, distinguished participants in this dialogue, and very dear students and research scholars. It is a matter of great honor and privilege for me to have this opportunity. I'm very grateful to Indian Council of World Affairs, the Director General in particular, and to have President Grimsson sitting next to you is also a special privilege, because I remember in early 90s when some of us would assemble at the Scott Polar Research Institute at University of Cambridge and contemplate on the future of the two polar regions, Arctic and Antarctica. One always dreamt of a day when the polar narratives would go beyond state-centric understandings of international relations. I think one major contribution that Arctic Circle has made to polar affairs, polar studies, is precisely in the sense that it has really broadened and deepened the understanding of what it means to be engaged with the circumpolar Arctic. So I think those who are working in the polar regions do owe a sense of gratitude to President Grimsson. Now, we have a very distinguished panel, and I think as the conversation and dialogue has evolved today, we have come to a point when we need some serious and systematic thinking about how India should engage with quote-unquote changing Arctic. What I intend to do in just a very few minutes, as soon as I can, take you through a set of slides. And the reason I want to do that is as follows. First of all, I think the narrative of changing Arctic needs acknowledgement of the fact that there has also been a remarkable continuity in the Arctic affairs. Secondly, when we are looking at the Arctic today, we are looking at not just one Arctic, but several Arctics. I mean, one Arctic, of course, is there, up there, within the latitudes and the longitudes of the global cartography. But there are many other Arctics which have emerged on climate map, on the map of geoeconomics, on changing strategic landscapes, and what our dear colleague Parag Khanna calls connectography, which means that the moment we locate or relocate the Arctic, or for that matter, the other two poles, the Himalayas and Antarctica, on the map of these functional and fluid geographies of supply chains and the forces of globalization, things start appearing very differently. Now, as we go through our narrative of the Indian engagement, I think it's very important to bear in mind the context. And when I talk about the context, let me also say that as compared to India's engagement with Antarctica, and we have several very distinguished scientists in Salvo sitting here, Shri Kailesh, Dr. Shailesh, Dr. Ravindra and others, relatively our engagement with Arctic, scientific and geopolitical, is more recent as compared to our engagement with Antarctica. Besides the fact that, of course, we are a member of the Svalbard Treaty. So my submission is that India's engagement with the Antarctic may please be seen in the larger context of India's engagement with Antarctica, which is very, very important. We haven't talked about that. We are fully aware of the argument made by Professor Oren Young and many other colleagues in Arctic and polar social sciences that the two are very different, Antarctica and the Arctic. But my submission is that as we look at India's Arctic engagement, it will be very useful for ourselves to ask a question: what have we learned from our engagement with Antarctica over the past many decades? Whether it is with regard to our scientific engagement in terms of our knowledge production, whether in terms of our participation in Antarctica Treaty consultative meetings, or it is in terms of contributions to agenda setting. I think many of these issues which relate to Antarctica are also very, very relevant when it comes to India's observer status in the Arctic Council. And of course, India is very much located in the third pole. We are very much a part of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. The larger context, I think, is also up there, which is the Anthropocene, the demographic map that we are looking at, the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate report, and the report that has recently come out from WMO. All these reports clearly suggest that had we been talking about India's Arctic engagement even 10 years back or 15 years back, we would have probably been talking on a very different wavelength. Today, whether we talk about India's geo-economic engagement or India's strategic engagement, we have to be very, very careful in the sense that we are looking at the context of Anthropocene where, as I said, we also have to focus on continuity. This shows you the plastic in the Arctic. And we know that we have been talking about globalizing Arctic. We have been talking about the pros and cons of Arctic losing its exceptionalism. Normalization of the Arctic, as some scholars call it, also comes with a cost, because if we compromise on the ecological exceptionalism of the Arctic, along with the exceptionalism of Antarctica and the Himalayas, I think we are going to be losers perhaps in not even in remote future, even in near future. So this map of tipping points then also forces us, and along with that, the 100 seconds to midnight, this is how close we are as humanity to what Bulletin of Atomic Scientists call the doomsday. All these things, I think, clearly suggest that when India looks at an Arctic and plans its engagement, it has to bear in mind the fact that the times are very, very different. 3 million years ago, because Excellency talked about the implications of the Arctic transformations for the global sea level rise, here is something very interesting, that 3 million years ago, the last time Earth had 400 ppm carbon dioxide, Antarctica melted, contributing 13 to 15 meters to global sea level rise. So what is happening in Antarctica today will also have a lot of implications for India's engagement with the other two poles. So I think that is one point which I wanted to flag. And then I want to go through very quickly through what I found very, very interesting. In the Global Agenda Council on the Arctic 2014, the World Economic Forum, there was a very small document called 5 Arctic Myths. Now, these 5 Arctic myths, I think, are very important as we discuss this afternoon India's engagement with the Arctic, because if you Google and type in great game narrative, or if you say tipping points, you will see a very large number of narratives that are floating around. Scramble for the Arctic. So what are these Arctic myths? The Arctic is uninhabited, unclaimed frontier with no regulation or governance. I think that is one myth that needs to be busted. And I think India is quite aware of that. We have Arctic Council. And then Oren Young draws our attention to, and we'll be very quick here. He says, I quote, there is no shortage of efforts to address needs for governance in the Arctic relating to matters of shipping, fishing, energy development, scientific research, and protection of sensitive ecosystems. But a major challenge is to manage interplay among these discrete developments, avoiding friction and promoting synergy. So another question which I want to place on table is, what does it mean when we say India's Arctic engagement? What is the substance of that Arctic engagement? Is it engagement with Arctic rim states? Is it an engagement with Arctic issues? If it is an engagement with Arctic issues, how do we define the boundaries of those Arctic issues? What does India engage with? Actors, state actors, as Mr. President said, non-state actors are becoming very important, civil societies, indigenous peoples organizations, or by becoming sheer member of the organizations like IMO, which are also not deeply involved or closely involved with Arctic affairs. The second myth is that the region's natural resource wealth is readily available for development. I think sometimes we forget that Arctic resource map is highly differentiated. So the question of who gets what, when, where, and how from the circumpolar Arctic, I emphasize circumpolar Arctic, is not a simple question. This is from Lawrence Brigham. I am grateful to him. He has allowed me to use this map. If we look at this map, what we are looking at is tremendous complexity in terms of sea routes, in terms of marine tourism, in terms of summer sea lift, exploration, and so on. Another myth is that the Arctic will be immediately accessible as sea ice continues to disappear, which I'm afraid is not going to be the case. Of course, we know that the shipping patterns or the shipping has intensified, say, particularly in the northern sea route within the Arctic sector, within the Russian sector. But if we look at the overall prospects, again, we are looking at a very complex map. We still do not know enough about the bathymetry of the Arctic, which means we are looking at governance issues. We are looking at the narrative of scramble for the Arctic in the light of the fact, or in the face of the fact, we still do not know enough about this part of the world. Same applies to the Southern Ocean and Antarctica, which means that the earlier sessions that we have heard on India's scientific contributions to Arctic is a very, very important contribution. Because I think India also looks at these regions as global knowledge commons. And India remains aware of the fact that perhaps a later engagement with the Arctic in fuller or better knowledge of the place will be a better proposition rather than an engagement with the Arctic about which your own knowledge is perhaps limited or limiting. Take, for example, the main risk elements related to Arctic shipping. We are looking at a very, very complex set of issues here. Look at the number of organizations which are key stakeholders in the opening up of the Arctic shipping routes. Again, we are looking at a very long and complex list. If we look at the Arctic Council Marine Shipping Assessment Report of 2009, it again graphically shows the kind of complexity that we are going to face. Arctic Search and Rescue Agreement is another remarkable achievement here of the Arctic Council. And then myth number 4, that Arctic is tense with geopolitical disputes and it is a next flashpoint for conflict. I think that also needs to be tempered with the reality that there's a lot of cooperation that is going on in the Arctic. Climate changes in the Arctic are solely of local and regional importance. I think that myth has been busted even in our deliberations earlier today. So I conclude my intervention, and then I'll invite the speakers, is number 1, as I said, what qualifies as Arctic engagement? Engagements with actors, Arctic rim states, non-state actors, civil society, circumpolar Arctic values, issues. What is it that we are talking about? What added value can India bring both individually and collectively with other Asian observer states to the Arctic Council, to Arctic governance? How can India contribute to the prospects of realizing a new planetary maritime geopolitics? As a matter of fact, I was also trying to bring in the notion of new maritime regionalism in the Arctic. That critiques geographical reductionism, has a more nuanced understanding of Arctic exceptionalism, acknowledges diversity, questions various myths about the Arctic routes and resources, respects the human and cultural geographies of the circumpolar north, and values international cooperation, diplomacy, and dialogue in the pursuit of commonly shared sustainable Arctic futures. So I think with these questions, I would now turn to two very well-known, distinguished panelists. One is somebody who has played a very important role through her organization in creating polar awareness in India, and that is Dr. Sulagna. So I'll request her to make our presentation. First, 10 to 15 minutes is what I would like to allot to both of you. Thank you.
Okay, hello, and thank you for having me here. And I'm happy to have such senior people here and listening to my simple world. I have a simple outlook to most things, and I have something to present here, which I feel that because I belong to an NGO, so it could be a civil society kind of an outlook, and I don't share very much an anxiety, and I feel that potential should be realized in very many ways. The world is very open as of now. So how do we move? So this is something, because I started work in 2010, so this was the first thing I came across, and I really found it very interesting. The Arctic is not like the Vegas, and what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. Now that was said in the climate perspective really, but now I think most things are like that, you know. Everything, whatever is happening in the Arctic, we are in India sitting here and we are all worried. So obviously whatever is happening in the Arctic is not staying in the Arctic. Now I'm going to base my talk on first two premises. Now we have two footholds in the Arctic. So I'm just going to talk about India. So one is in the science, which we've already had said, we've had a talk in the morning, and the other is in oil and gas. So, so we are going to just talk about those two things first, so the two footholds as such. But oil and gas is very Russia. We don't really have much outside that. Then we're going to move into something to see our achievements against. So you need a backdrop. And in the backdrop, I have taken China because, of course, of its aggressive, movement into the Arctic space. But of course, we need to see Russia. We need to see the other actors. There are a lot of other people we need to see. But this is what I have done. We've just seen it against China, and two countries, Iceland, I have seen, and I have also studied Norway. And Norway is interesting, and I'll tell you why Norway is interesting. So. So to start, science, these are the two stations. One, so I'm a geographer, so I put everything out there in maps. So the first one is in Svalbard, that's an island archipelago, and it's close to Greenland and Norway. So one side is Greenland and the other side is Norway. And the other is in Cambridge Bay, that is in Canada. That's the newest one that's just come up in the last 2 months. And Svalbard, as you can see, Ny-Ålesund is on the western part of the archipelago, and that is where our station is. This is a view of the station. You can see Himadri, and you can see the beautiful mountains at the back, and that's an inset. And the stations in front are British Antarctic Survey stations. So you can see that out there. This is CHARS. This is it's a shared resource which India is going to do. You know, he showed you the instruments in the morning. Those are the instruments that we'll be taking there, and we'll be putting it up. It's a shared resource with other countries as well. So 16 stations, 12 nations, and research collaboration with CHARS. And the research goals are, we've already talked about this in the morning, so I won't go there. Now, I have compared, this is my own work we've been doing, it's work in progress, and it has a lot of issues as of now to clean it up. But we're looking, because we're working in this sector for a long time, so we're looking for somebody to fund this so that we can do this well. So these are published papers. So NPI is National Norwegian Polar Institute, and they have been doing work, and we have been doing work, and we are just trying to compare. So we see that we are doing more work in biotech, while NPI has a more rounded outlook to a lot of other areas also. So the tilt of NCPOR, that is our nodal body, is towards biotech. But none of this published work actually talk about Arctic melting or methane or monsoon and teleconnections and all of that yet. So I am told that work is in progress, but till now we don't have any published papers on this. We are more on a biotech kind of roadmap. But NPI is more rounded in its approach. Here is Krishnan. I just took this picture because Krishnan was out there, and this is the Indy Arc that's been deployed in the Arctic waters. He's not here right now, but that's him standing there. That's in Kongsfjorden. That's a fjord in the Svalbard, that Ny-Ålesund area. And there we've put this equipment into the water, and we get a lot of data from it, and we're doing a lot of work with it as well. Now, this is oil and gas in the Arctic. Now, this is what, in January 15, 2020, many of you must have read the news. Dharmendra Pradhan, who is the Indian Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, said, we are keen to explore the new sea route to source crude oil and energy through Russia's Arctic. The route has the potential to cut cost and time for transporting energy from Russia to India. This is because Vladivostok to Chennai. That was the heading that came, and so this is what we're looking at. Here is a map, which is a very interesting look you can have. This is the project. So the Vancouver area is the large red dot. If I can, the large red dot is the Vancouver area. We have 25 million tons of oil is projected here. We are working with 3 fields over here. Then there is a 600-kilometer pipeline which is being, it's a project that we are going to be part of. Is in that Taimyr Peninsula. That peninsula is, if I could, there's a red dot here somewhere? Yeah. So this is the peninsula area, and this is the Taimyr Peninsula. This is the 600-kilometer pipeline, which is going to now, this is Murmansk, and this is your route that takes, so the northern sea route is all along the coast. This is the port, and from here. So it will pass through these areas, and that's where the oil is. So even this Payakha in the Dukinka area, that is also on the Yenisei River. Basically, this is the Yenisei River. So this entire area is very resource rich. And there is also coal here, and we have a Watchdog Coal Arctic project, which also we are there. I mean, we are part of that project. We also have 2 private companies who are part of these projects. And companies, Indian companies that are there are ONGC, Tata Steel, Engineers India Limited, IOC, OIL, and BPCL. Now, there's a film here which shows the Watchdog coal exploration. I don't know. I just wanted to show you the kind of location in the Arctic, because we are visual people. So if you see something, you feel a connect, but I can't. Doesn't matter, let it be. So now, in 2018, 4.5 million tons of coal was exported to India. GAIL has a 20-year agreement with Gazprom. So there's Rosneft and Gazprom. So both of them we have projects with. And in February 2020, Rosneft expressed their keenness to bid for the privatization. BPCL is being privatized, and 53% stake India holds, and Rosneft is one of the people who are going to bid for it. So this is the backdrop. Now I come to the global matrix. Now, where are we in this matrix? So if this is what the Arctic is about, and we have 2 strongholds. One is in petroleum, but largely Russia, and one is Arctic program, which is now just got into Canada. Till now it has been in Norway. If this is the matrix, so world versus Arctic and Arctic versus world, meaning the interconnections. Now, 4 pillars are resources, economics, that's 1. Earth systems 2nd, governance and institution 3rd, and people and culture 4th. Now, if we take this premise, then where do we actually stand in this? This we've already seen. Sir, in his talk, had already talked about these overlapping relationships. And here we see China is party to the United Nations Security Council and UNCLOS, and has now come into the Arctic. So this is why I think I took China to see what it is that is being done. Now, this is China's icebreaker. It's called the Snow Dragon, and they have 2 of them now. And they have done a half a dozen forages into the Arctic space and for research. Now, this is in 2000. So 2 statements I'll present to you, and why I want to argue why India can't think on similar lines. An icebreaker breaks through heavy glaciers and moves forward. Here is somebody who is breaking ice for you, and you can actually follow. Because it says, Arctic belongs to all people around the world, as no nation has sovereignty over it. That's what China says. China must play an indispensable role in Arctic exploration, as we have 1/5 of the world's population. So then the next one, The precedent says the global governance system is built and shared by the world, not monopolized by a single country. China has no intention to do so. China is involved in building current international system. Now, this is something that we need to probably, think about and move forward if we can. And if Arctic is an area where exploration is happening, then India should be doing more than what it is currently doing. Now, in the superstructure China has, in the 2 decades, made phenomenal progress. And it is called itself a near-Arctic state. And, people are wondering, what is there? Are they a status quoist? Are they opportunists? Or are they here for, a kind of revolutionary, or, what kind of role does China have? But China wants to be recognized now, today, as a soft power. So it's starting to invest in institution building, in norms, in values, and building a kind of recognition that they are not here for only the resources, but also as, some kind of soft power in this location. Now, this is there. I just wanted to see what are the Chinese, what scientific impact they have done in their science diplomacy, because that's how they started. But this is the organization I have. China actually has 2. PRIC, that is Polar Research Institute of China, is what we see. That's the face. They are everywhere. They manage the research stations. They are doing. They have the ice class vessels. They are the face. The Beijing counterpart is Chinese Arctic and Antarctic Administration, which is actually the policy body which makes the policies for them. Then that reports to State Oceanic Administration, and which reports to the Ministry of Land and Resources. So now, if you can think, maybe land and resources, if that is the nodal ministry, you can think what they are thinking, perhaps. It is resource. But at least at present, they're coming out as a softer power. Now, this is another study in progress that we are doing, and again, we've been trying to get some funding to continue this. Now, this is Iceland and China partnerships. And we can see that 2011, 8, and 13, there have been some advents that China made into health and high-end tourism and all of that, which didn't work. From the time 2011, they had geothermal on one side, and the other side they had science diplomacy, science. After 2011, you can see many projects have come into the China-Iceland partnership. And so there's methanol plants, so basically energy. Then there is resource, and then infrastructure and telecom. So these are the areas that China is working with Iceland on. And this is Norway. Now, Norway is interesting. Like I said, again, Norway was the first one to start in 1954. And Ni Allison, 2004, China established its station. It's called the Yellow River Station. But there's 2 road bumps that happened. First, because of Dalai Lama, and the second was because of Liu Xiaobo. Both of them got Peace Prize, and both of them were not people who China liked. So they were not very willing to look at them kindly. So a lot of other bilateral ties were frozen, excepting science. So science kept on happening, despite the fact that other ties were not really happening in Norway. So that is why I took Norway, because science diplomacy is the key to this area for everything. Now, this is the other thing that I was talking about. The space observation research centers is Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Greenland. And there's speculation about scientific equipment being used for military purpose. And this is something that I was flagging in the morning about one of the allegations that I've come across, that it's science, but we don't know what is there in that science. Now, this is an icebreaker. This is a Russian icebreaker, which is actually, this is the Northern Sea route. And a Russian icebreaker is escorting a ship. Now, I don't know what ship this is. That's a tanker. So it's escorting a tanker. And this is what the sea route looks like. So it's not what we just talked about a little while ago, that although there are lots of ups, there are downs also, because, technological hurdles are there, congestion, accidental disruption, summer passage, all these are downs. but China stands to benefit the most. Now, India's roadmap. So what do you think we should do? So since the Arctic is not such a very hardened and defined space, there's still a lot of space to maneuver. So, and it is now the center of world politics. So we need partners. We need to look out to be part of this Arctic order. Now, what are the limitations of being an observer? We are an observer, but there are limitations. We only engage in working groups, number one. Number two, that we can propose projects only through an Arctic state or a permanent participant. And number three, that the financial contribution cannot exceed that of another financing Arctic state. So now this is our limitation, and we need to go beyond this. Can we hope, some point of time, to hope for a permanent status? Now, research needs, we need more research people, definitely. NCPR has only 2 researchers, and the budget needs to be increased. We need to diversify research. We do 2 specific locations right now, even in Svalbard. And it's not as if our scientists don't want to go beyond and do a lot more. They want to do a lot more. But there's a lot of logistic requirements. Whenever you need to go to these icy realms, I'm done. It's just last slide. So when we go to newer locations, we definitely need to have more logistic requirements. So it's not as if our people don't want to go. It's just that there is more funding required to do these work. And for a stronger Arctic Council role, we need something like a body like Russia, with a dedicated ministry perhaps. We need to enhance the funding, maybe Ministry of Space, Ministry of Earth Sciences, propel private investments, because I think with the, with the precedent going, private investors were also there. We can collaborate at many multi-country modes, and we can posture. So we need high-level people to be there for posturing, for visibility. We need large delegations, like the way China does. And the other idea we had was to establish geopolitical chairs in NAC. We have something in the UGC called NAC A-grade universities. So establish Arctic geopolitical chairs right away, and followed by scientific chairs, because scientific chairs takes time to come, because there's a lot of equipment and there's a lot of other, paraphernalia with scientific chairs. But maybe at the start we could do geopolitical chairs. And also round up our polar capacity by preparing a repository of students who are engaged in India and abroad. And that way, maybe we can have a ready bucket of people to right away go and seek information or ask them to do some research. And lastly, hold meetings of international importance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting, thoughtful presentation with very useful recommendations. May I now turn to our next speaker, Dr. Subha Chandran, who is Professor and Dean, School of Conflict and Security Studies, NIAS in Bangalore. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Absolutely. Now let me start with a confession and a thank you note. The confession is, normally when the last speaker in workshops and seminars tell that whatever points I had, it was spoken by others, I never understood until today. The second is a thank you note. Let me start with Ambassador Raghavan. Thank you, sir, for getting us here for this interesting event. And let me also thank my director, Professor Shailesh Nayak. He was instrumental in we working on Arctic at my institution. And all the scientific inputs, that whatever little I have, it's all his ideas and his inputs. And I also have a PhD scholar working exclusively on Arctic. By the time when she finishes her PhD, hopefully she would be one of the few PhD scholars from India who has done a PhD only on Arctic. And she kinds of puts into my head about Arctic Council, Sami Council, and all those paraphernalia that Arctic associated with. And the last thank you note is to Vijay Sakuja, who introduced Arctic to me in 2014 or 2015. I don't know whether you would remember, Vijay, in one of the writings for us. When you told me that time, when he wrote that commentary for me, I said, why do you want to write about Arctic? Arctic is too far. I'm going to talk against what I told 4 or 5 years before. I sincerely wish I listened to him that time. We could have started this process much early. Thank you, Vijay, for putting Arctic in. My point is purely from an Indian perspective, trying to make a statement that Arctic is not far as we think. So if it is not far, the question that Professor Sanjay also asked, what could be a strategy towards Arctic, what could be an Indian strategy towards Arctic. This Indo-Arctic is just an idea. China has a polar Silk Route as a document, and it calls itself as a near Arctic power. So if India has to position itself, what could be a positioning paper, or just because they call near Arctic, we can't call ourselves a far Arctic power. It would like a copy paste of the idea. So this Indo-Arctic could be a construct which we look at. Let me start with what we are doing on Arctic research at the Institute. There is a lot of focus on science and technology at the Institute relating to Arctic. We are trying to come up with a policy paper precisely on what you have asked, what India could do in Arctic. We are trying to build a set of databases on who is doing what and whatever we have discussed in the morning. A set of databases, 6 or 7 databases we have identified. We are also planning to do a series of lectures on Arctic. In fact, we have started with a Svalbard, 100 years of Svalbard series. We are hoping, sir, you will be visiting Bangalore and we'll have one lecture with you. And we are also trying to do some capacity building in terms of getting young scholars, PhD people to come and work with us. So this is a small publicity exercise for my program, once again at the cost of Ambassador Ragnar. Now, my point, it's a five slide presentation here. 3 hypotheses I'm making, and I'll try to justify them. One, Arctic may be geographically far from a perspective, but I'm strongly convinced Arctic is already here in India in terms of economic, environmental, energy, science and technology and strategic perspectives. I will explain it, why I say Arctic is already here. So if anyone has to say Arctic is far, maybe you don't understand what we are talking about. That's hypothesis 1. The second hypothesis is if India has to be seen as an Arctic power, beyond being just an observer, that's a different story. And it has to be recognized that we are a part of the Arctic Council. Then we cannot look at Arctic, we have to be there in Arctic. That's my second position, that we have to be there, India has to be there in Arctic. I'll explain how India could be there in Arctic in my next slide. And the third is, if India has to go to Arctic, I think we have to bring Arctic to India. I will just, these 3 slides is my presentation, I'll just go one by one. My first point, why I say Arctic is not far. There are scientific studies already who clearly link India's monsoons with what's happening in Arctic. What is happening in Arctic and what is happening to Himalayas because of what's happening in Arctic, and what is happening to our monsoon because of these 2 factors. If the Indian agriculture and Indian economy is heavily dependent on monsoon, and if the monsoon in turn is dependent on what's happening in Himalayas and Arctic, then we cannot say Arctic is far. It's there as a part of your economy in the country today. So the monsoon is something that we have to keep this in mind, that Indian monsoon, maybe there needs to be studies that needs to explain fully, but then there are enough indications with existing studies that Indian monsoons are linked with the larger climate change, in turn Himalayas and the Arctic, that has been proven. So let's take it as a given that our monsoon and it's how Arctic is a cause and our monsoons are an effect. That's number 1. Number 2, that whatever is happening in Arctic also has an impact on the coastal security, not only about Indian coastal security but also about our neighbors, Maldives, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. So it's not only we are going to look in terms of our coast, we also have to take care of what's happening to the coastal security of Maldives. So we can say that it is Bangladesh problem if there is something related to coastal security, and if there is a large scale migration, it's their problem. Or we can say Maldivians have been working really hard for the last few years, it's their problem, we can say that. But God forbid if something goes wrong, where do you think they will go? Will they go to Bradford or Leeds, or will they come to Cochin and Bengal and Northeast? Keeping in mind what's happening now, I don't think that's what we would want to. Following the maritime and coastal security, what is happening to our coast, I think we have to take a larger look. So again, Arctic is there not only in terms of monsoon, it's there in our coast, not only our coast, also in our neighbors' coast. That's the second point. The third point, my director would repeatedly say that we have a very strong space program in India. We receive signals and we synthesize it. there is a strong belief that space can be better followed if we have stations in Arctic. That your ability to synthesize data, if you have a station in Arctic, it will help you do it much better. So in a way, whatever our space is related to at least 6 or 7 SDG goals that we have. Space brings our links with SDG goals closer. And then if we have a space station, 1 or 2 stations in Arctic, not in just one place, 2 or 3 places in 2 or 3 different places in the Arctic, it will help us follow space closer. The fourth is we have already discussed in the morning the rare earths. Rare earths not only from an energy perspective but also rare earth from a scientific perspective. We say that Chinese have already monopolized the rare earths in Africa, and we have been talking about in the morning how the Chinese expeditions. I'm sure there is a rare earth component also to it. Whether we can also be a part of that rare earth, and then so that in turn we get our scientific establishment gets benefit. The last point, strategic development. The last session, I think Captain Parmar beautifully brought out how whatever is happening in Arctic has a direct strategic implication to us. So this is my first slide telling Arctic is not far, Arctic is there with us. It's not just in our borders, it's here in this room. The fact that we are discussing it would tell you. My second hypothesis, if it is the case, then what could be an Indian strategy towards it? So I just put it as an Indo-Arctic, maybe we can think in terms of another phrase. My idea is to have a geographic construct to justify why India should be in the Arctic. So this is the idea that we are trying to, what is there in for India if somebody has to ask, we have to, like the Polar Silk Route, like a document, like a strategy, like the Indo-Pacific or whatever it is. So the Indo-Arctic is a kind of a geographic construct that I'm just planning to work further on. And what could this geographic construct would look at? That is what even President Grimsson was talking about. We will not be able to do it on our own. Let's look at who are the other countries in Asia who can work with us towards meeting our larger objectives in Arctic. I look around and then see Singapore, South Korea and Japan. The reasons are simple. They are also part of the Arctic, and that they have shown willingness to work on Arctic. President Grimsson captured it beautifully. By the way, so this slide was prepared much before you said that. The Arctic Council forums in Asia, all these countries have had Arctic Council. India is the only Arctic observer that hasn't have a Arctic forum. It's strange. Abu Dhabi is having it next year. Ideally we should have put our hand forward and then had a Arctic Council meeting in India. Yeah. I'll come back to that later. So this taking it along because our inability to do it on our own, and also we need larger investments. The South Koreans and the Japanese have taken a lead on, say, the polar shipping or polar infrastructure. Perhaps we may be able to take advantage of them. And also why I have identified this Singapore, South Korea and Japan is also what our Prime Minister stated when he was in Vladivostok. He said that Vladivostok-Chennai link, if that link has to really get materialized, I think we may have to use this. Yeah. The third point, I think what Professor Sanjay said, what will India bring to the table? If India has to be there in Arctic, what can India bring to the table? I put it as Indo-Arctic values. My director has been telling about how India has used its space knowledge in terms of bringing out a better early warning on cyclone, or how we have built a better tsunami warning system, or how our monsoon prediction warning have been better. So our understanding of space we are not only using for ourselves, we are also using for some of the other countries. So our scientific research and experience need not necessarily be India specific, that we can say that it is a common goal, maybe a global common. India sees Arctic as a global common, and then we will be able to, like how we are sharing data with other countries. India could be India, so that could be one scientific value that we bring in. And then we also discussed about the indigenous community. I think India has a rich experience of dealing with diversity in our country. So I'm sure we should be able to bring our our experience in terms of how Arctic could deal with the indigenous community. I don't think any other country is as culturally multi-diverse as India is. So these are some of the values that we could bring to the table. The fourth point is, in the afternoon we were talking about, Captain Kumar was also talking about the bilaterals. I go with him. Let's go with the bilaterals. Let's look at the big ticket items, Russia. But small is also beautiful in Arctic. Let's look at 3 countries in terms of countries: Denmark, Norway, and Iceland as countries. Let's look at people, the indigenous people, again, small communities. My PhD scholar, she is working on semi-council as one council which looks into the indigenous people. Let's look into this, not only states, also people. But after listening to President Grimsson, I realized that we can also look into the non-state actors, the business communities in the Arctic. That's a third point, maybe. A small is beautiful. If you are looking at tourism, Arctic tourism, perhaps we can help Captain Palmer reach there with the help of these people. So if we have to realize it, what are the vectors that we have? How can we go to, that's my last point on realizing Indo-Arctic. How can we go there? 2. One is the Vladivostok, Chennai. We have already promised. There is a statement that has been formally made. The other one is the INSTC, the International North-South Trade Corridor. Ambassador Arvind Gupta in another meeting he was telling, it was he who put this idea, that INSTC can have 2 components and go both to the Siberian side and go northward towards the Arctic side, or maybe we can go to the Norwegian. So these 2 could be the vectors. In case if you are looking at, if Arctic is too far, how will we reach them? We don't have to reach only through the sea route. We can also go through the land route. It could be our own road component. The third hypothesis, last slide, or last but one slide. If India has to go to the Arctic, I think we have to bring Arctic to India. What do I mean by bring Arctic to India? Number one, that what President Grimsson said, that we have to, have Arctic Forum here in India. In fact, one of the discussion we had last month when we established Arctic research in my institute is by 2023 or 24 that we should be able to host the Arctic Forum in Bangalore. So we are willing to host you, sir, in 23 or 24. So we should be able to bring Arctic Forum to India. But when I say we have to bring, we can't just go and say we are willing to host. We have to do certain back-end integration if we have to bring them, So what would be the back-end integration? We need to have some capacity to host them. We should have Sulogna in another meeting, she was referring to the number of papers that we have presented in Arctic that has to multiply or that, we have to increase. So there has to be a certain back-end integration that, again, we can't do it alone. I think institutions have to come together, institutions like ICAA, institutions like NIAS, one with a foreign policy, one with a SNT, and one with maybe a couple of universities. I think we need to have a stronger back-end integration so that the Arctic takes us seriously. The third point is not only the council we have to bring multiple institutions and forum. There are multiple institutions and forum, we have been talking in the morning. Not only platforms, but also even academic platforms. For example, U-Arctic or the Russian Arctic, the multiple institutions in Alaska or Washington. You just have to Google, you will see a huge list of academic institutions. I think we may have to link with them, get people from there. That's the point of the capacity building and Arctic chair. I think we should have an Arctic chair. At least in my institute, Professor Shailesh Nayak has agreed that we will have an Arctic chair and we'll host some of the big names for a month or two at the institute. And we should have an internal dialogue in India on Arctic. Let's forget about the international dialogue. I think maybe this could be the first dialogue in India. Maybe next year, sir, maybe we would want to invite you to Bangalore, and then we can have the next dialogue in India. So that's a last conclusion, last slide, that let's just not look at the Arctic. Let us be in the Arctic, and let us bring Arctic to India. I rest my case there.
Thank you very much. I think another very fascinating presentation, I must say. And listening to you, I was reminded of the fact that our engagement with Arctic doesn't start with Svalbard Treaty. It goes back to not even 1903, because Bal Gangadhar Tilak wrote a book called The Arctic Home in the Vedas. It is a fascinating book. And when Tilak wrote this, he referred to Vedic hymns. It's a very fine testimony to the fact that Arctic has been in Indian imagination for a very, very long time. And India is keen on a multipolar world, not only in the international system, but also multipolar, polar world, focusing both on the knowledge power interface. So we have 10 minutes left, and I will request you to be very, very precise in your interventions, whether they are questions or statements, and then we'll get back to speakers. I'll go to you first, and then to you, Captain Parmar.
Good evening. My name is Kritika Singh. I work as a senior research associate at Jindal University, but prior to this, I work with Professor Grimsson. We teach law of the sea. Prior to this, I was working at the Arctic Center at the University of Lapland. Professor Koigurova sends his greetings to you, sir.
Oh, thank you.
I've been working on Arctic issues for 2-3 years now as well, and I agree with what you said about the Arctic as global commons and there being an exchange of data. My comment there is contribution to scientific assessments in the working groups. So while expanding our capacity by putting our stations there, but also highlighting this expertise to Arctic nations and possibly contributing to scientific assessments within the working groups, not only like being present. And the second intervention is, you already said that, using the traditional knowledge systems and highlighting that kind of collaboration to engage with permanent participants. Just two comments.
Thank you, Captain Kumar.
I just have a comment. I find your term Indo-Arctic very seductive, but we've had a lot of problems with Indo-Pacific.
It's an American one. This is ours.
I'm just saying, no, that's the issue. Like right now, we are trying to work out a position paper for India and the Indo-Pacific. The term may not be acceptable. We've been acting east. I think we can act Arctic. It's just a suggestion. But your term may run into a lot of trouble.
Captain Vijay Satuja, Dr. Vijay Satuja.
I mean, I find there is a Arctic advocacy coming from the non-government organizations like what Ragnar has talked about. We also have not institutions, I should call them organization or groupings such as Sea Shepherd and Greenpeace. I think they are doing a great job. Good, bad, ugly. Sometimes they can be very, very aggressive. I mean, what role do they have in the Arctic region or in the Arctic Council? Well, there may not be many takers because they can be pretty offensive sometimes, and we've seen that in the case of Greenpeace versus Russia. So, but they do a good job in terms of bringing in awareness of issues of environment ecology, and I think President Grimsson, maybe you'd like to comment, or Sulagna, maybe you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Grimsson.
Well, thank you again, both of you, for very interesting presentations. Let me first emphasize the distinction between the Arctic Council and the Arctic Circle. There's been some confusion in comments here today about that. The Arctic Council is the intergovernmental body of the 8 Arctic states, where other states are observers, and they are very limited in terms of how you can access it and participate. And in addition, the chairmanship of the Arctic Council rotates every second year between countries, and each country in its chair determines largely how it's going to conduct its affairs. The Arctic Circle is, however, an open platform which has grown in the last 7 years and allows anybody who wants to be an active participant in the Arctic to come there in its own name, with its own agenda, its own contribution. And that means that anybody in India that wants to play an Arctic role can do that through the Arctic Circle. Both the annual assemblies in Iceland, where the core of the Arctic community gathers. So if India wants to quickly present itself to the Arctic community, you don't do it through the Arctic Council. That will take you years and be very complicated. But you do it by turning up at the Arctic Circle assemblies and holding sessions, either the World Council or your institute or anybody, and they invite others to participate with you. And as I said this morning, one of the great ways for India to signal, look guys, we are also here, is to do what China, Korea, and Japan have done, throw a big party on the final night, an India night. That is a very clever, sophisticated way, non-governmental way. And anybody from India could actually host it in cooperation with us. So through the Arctic Circle assemblies and forums, you have a flexibility that will allow anybody from India, whatever the foreign ministry does, or whatever you do with respect to the Arctic Council, to become a major Arctic player. And you can seek partners with others, whether they are academic institutes, think tanks, even governments, through that network. You mentioned the EU Arctic, which will have a conference 2 days prior to the next assembly in cooperation with us. So it's very important you make that distinction, that apart from the Arctic Council, there is an avenue open to you, or anybody in India, to within 12 or 24 months to be seen as a major Arctic player. The second point I want to make, which I've never thought of before, but came from your talk. There is a great emphasis, both through the Arctic Circle and in general, to enhance the engagement of the indigenous people. We have, even in cooperation with Conservation International, is one of the major American environmental organizations, organized what we call the Global Arctic Indigenous Dialogue, which means a dialogue between indigenous people in the Arctic and indigenous people elsewhere. You correctly pointed out that in the Himalayan regions of India, you have indigenous communities. The problem for China, and I say this very openly because I always talk very openly, is that China has great difficulty in allowing their indigenous people up in the third pole regions of China, the Tibetan Plateau, to engage with other indigenous people. So you're absolutely correct. India could move quickly into this framework of Arctic Global Indigenous Dialogue, and thereby bringing the experience of the various communities in the Indian Himalayan regions into dialogue with the indigenous people in the Arctic. And I tell you, it will be a fascinating exercise, And you will have partners like Conservation International, which is one of the most affluent and with an annual budget of almost $300 million, and people like Lauren Jobs and people from the Walmart family on its boards. So I think we should explore that, because there China can't really play a role. It's an open territory for you, and it will also be an interesting linkage to the third pole, to Himalaya. My third point is, whether it's the Indo-Arctic or whatever it is, I think you are correct. You need a trademark. You need some kind of a trademark for the Indian engagement, whether it's the Indo-Arctic or the Himalaya Arctic, whatever it is, something which is understandable to everybody and gives you a justification to have a multi-level engagement. And finally, I just want to warn you, because you brought the European Union and the NATO into your circle for this. The European Union doesn't really matter in this respect, and they will never be accepted as observers in the Arctic Council, because Russia simply says, how many chairs do you want? Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Greenland, Faroe Islands, and then the Brussels as well. Come on. So Putin will never, I know this firsthand, never ever accept that. They can finance science and so on, but it's misleading if you think the European Union is an Arctic player. Similar with NATO. NATO is not an Arctic player, for the obvious reason that if NATO starts as such to enter the Arctic, it will be a signal that the Cold War has arrived. And they're very careful not to do it. So the interesting thing about the Arctic is that nation states are still bigger players than regional or international organizations. So France, Germany, Britain, Sweden, Finland play in the Arctic, but not the European Union. Norway, Iceland, Canada, US, Norway play in the Arctic, but not NATO. So don't institutionalize this too much in an academic analytical framework where you bring other international institutions into this. Because this will also make it easier for India. And you are also correct. Select some countries as your partners in this. And the road forward will be relatively easy for you.
Thank you very much, President Grimsson. I think with your another thoughtful intervention, I'm afraid I'll have to bring the session to a close. We are behind the schedule by 2 minutes. But I think it has been a fascinating day. I'm sure we are looking forward to another very fascinating valedictory session. One thing is very clear that as India looks at the Arctic, the circumpolarness of the Arctic, I think, needs to be taken into account, because circumpolarness of the Arctic is a great value to uphold and work for. Arctic will continue to surprise us with new frontiers of cooperation. For example, I was looking at the new undersea cables for high-speed traders. It's not only a short route for ships, not only for polar aviation, but we are likely to see sooner than later this another very intricate, intriguing world of undersea cables. So a lot has already been said and written about that. One thing is very clear, that whether we go to the Arctic or to Antarctica or to the third pole, the Himalayas, the call is for innovation in cooperation at different scales. And lastly, one of the reasons why I find Arctic Circle very fascinating is because it reminds me of Gandhian notion of oceanic circles. And as Gandhi says, that when you look at the oceanic circles, these provide autonomy to the smaller circles. They don't clash with other narratives, but they create the necessary accommodation and space for other narratives to come into some kind of a dialogic diplomacy and dialogic politics. So I think sometimes it's better to look at the Arctic not so much in terms of the traditional classical scale of geography or geographical scale, but more in terms of these cooperative circles and cycles. So thank you very much indeed. And with this, may I bring the session to a close. Please join me in expressing our deep appreciation to both the panelists and all those who made these wonderful interventions.
Thank you so much, sir. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Chaturvedi and our two panelists, Ms. Chattopadhyay and Dr. Chandran. We will now take a 15-minute break and reconvene here at 5 o'clock for the valedictory session. Thank you so much. And it said, do you want to do this? I said yes.
Very good. I was ambassador.
I can't talk. Message.
Thank you very much for coming, and we must keep in touch. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Since this is the last session of the day, may I begin by, first of all, thanking His Excellency Mr. Grimsson for his Sapru House lecture this morning, but also for your participation in the seminar the whole day. It's a matter of some gratification for us in the Council that we could bring together so many different institutions from different parts of the country to participate in this seminar, and I am personally very happy that we could use the visit of His Excellency Mr. Grimsson to catalyze this larger discussion about the Arctic. I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Dr. Stephen Watson for this session and also for his participation in today's seminar. We look forward to hearing from you with great interest. I'm very happy to have Ambassador Arvind Gupta, who is the head of the Vivekananda Foundation, a sister think tank. Previously, he was Deputy National Security Advisor. But for those of us who have been in this business, he's in many ways been a key point for lateral thinking in the government for at least a decade and a half, possibly 2 decades. Head of the Institute of Defense Studies and Strategies, and not just about the Arctic, but many other ideas and ventures which required bringing together a number of institutions, number of players onto a common platform. A great deal of the thinking for that was done by him. He came here at short notice at my special request because I discovered, thanks to the information conveyed by Ambassador Armstrong Chungson, our ambassador in Iceland, that in fact this idea of your visiting and dovetailing that with a larger networking of scholars and institutions about the Arctic was first conceived by Mr. Arvind Gupta. So thank you very much, Arvind. He was in the middle of a conference in the Vivekananda Foundation. Thank you very much for finding the time to come here. We've discussed the Arctic the whole day, so I don't want to add anything substantive, except to say that the discussions were very meaningful. They were certainly, I think they've helped in bringing together institutions and scholars. We will now have to work on as to how to give this a firmer institutional basis. But also I think the sessions all through the day and the Sapru House lecture in the morning served a primary function of the Council itself, which was to bring intricate and complex issues of foreign policy in front of a larger audience. So I think that public engagement function of this Council was also served very well by today's discussions and events. With these remarks, may I request Ambassador Arvind Gupta his remarks. And as I said, for those of us who have been in the know, he has been the center of lateral thinking both in and outside the government. So I really look forward to hearing your thoughts on the Arctic today.
Namaskar. Good evening to everyone. Excellency Grimsson, I had a chance to meet you briefly at Arkhangelsk in one of the Arctic conferences in, I think, March 2017. And at that time we discussed possibility of a visit to India. And I think you were organizing in later that year in Arctic conference in Iceland somewhere. And he had offered that India should have a whole session and a pavilion and an exhibition, and should bring all those who are interested in the Arctic should be present there, because the Chinese are there and many other countries are there, but somehow Indian participation was missing. So when I came back, I did try to put together a team, but before that team could go, or I think a depleted team did go, but I'm not very sure whether we participated in a big way. But this idea that India should be fully engaged with the Arctic is something that I also benefited from my discussions with him and my participation in that Arctic Circle Archangel's conference. So thank you very much. Good to see you here. And of course, Armstrong is, we were just discussing, we have met before also. I'm glad that you are there. And then of course my fellow panelists and my other friends here, Shailesh Nayak ji, and I have been discussing some of these issues for the last 7-8 years. So very happy to see him here, and friend Subha is here. Where is Subha? I saw him somewhere just now. And they have set up an Arctic group in Nias, which is a very good thing. Now there is a focal point and we could probably all collaborate. Now I think what I'll do is, I was seeing the program, many of the points that I wanted to make have already been discussed at length, so I need not dwell on them at any length. But as you mentioned, I'm coming from a conference, and this conference was on a very interesting theme called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This theme is, which means it's a Sanskrit in Maha Upanishad. There is a line which says, world is a family. We are all a family. And on this theme, we have been having conferences, and this is the second. And in fact, in our parliament, this is inscribed that world is a family. And our Prime Minister has also been emphasizing this idea about world is a family. And I think the world is a family idea is so relevant in today's world, and particularly when we talk about environment, and we talk about climate change, and we talk about impact and how all these major oceanic and atmospheric processes are interlinked and how they impact each other. And through those impact, of course, everything, the human life, biodiversity, everything else is. So I think these ideas are very, very relevant. And we have also been having a Hindu-Buddhist Samvad, which is a dialogue for the last several years, again supported by Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Abe, where the religious leaders and other people, spiritual leaders, have been coming together and discussing problems of conflict and problems of environment. So this idea of that we are all interlinked, they come, is now coming from various directions. And I think the melting of the Arctic ice, the climate change, the impact on the monsoons, and the other interconnections that we have, and we are all on the same boat, we are all a family. I think this comes out very, very strongly when we talk about the Arctic. So I think this is one reason that why India should be interested, because we are the promoter of this idea of connectedness, world as a family, and of course we are impacted by what is happening in the Arctic, and through climate change and various other processes. Now, since I'm coming from a conference which talked a lot about Vedas and Upanishads, let me also begin. It was very interesting for me, a discovery a few years ago that maybe it was discussed this morning here. In 1903, Bal Gangadhar Tilak had published a book titled The Arctic Home in the Vedas. Now, he first wrote about it in 1898. He was an astronomer, mathematician, apart from being a politician. And so he wrote about this, and the focus of his thing is that several hymns in the Vedas, they reminded him that there could be some connection with the Arctic. And this was discussed by the people of that time for many years. And perhaps this is something which has probably not been carried. I'm not saying that right or wrong, but the fact that there is a connection between the different people in different regions, that came out very strongly. And somebody should perhaps read that book and read it more carefully. Not a question of saying that it is, but this exactly is the title, The Arctic Home in the Vedas. So you have the Arctic and the Vedas interconnected. So need I say more, that India should be interested in the Arctic. But of course, apart from that, we have been associated with the Svalbard Treaty. We are members of the Arctic Council, observer member. Indian senior officials now regularly attend. India is also participating in many of these, whatever is allowed under the Arctic Council treaty. We are, I think, participating in some activities along with some other countries. So all that, I think, must have been discussed. See, in India, it is still, the argument is not clinched that India should take interest in the Arctic. So it's okay, around this table, we are basically more or less perhaps converted or less skeptical. So we can take this idea. But how do you sell it to the ordinary person or to a policy maker that India must get interested in the Arctic? I think that is also a task of the researchers and think tanks and so on, that how do we clinch that case. And when I was in the government, we found this. It was very difficult to get people to discuss the Arctic in a passionate way. So, okay, you call a meeting, people will come and they say, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But how do you connect it? How do you make it into a proposal? How do you take it through the government? How do you get the top leadership interested? So this was, I think, always a problem. So one way, I think, you can get people's interest in a issue in the government, and particularly in the foreign policy or security establishment, is to bring in China. So, I think, of course, China has gone into the Arctic in a very big way. And the conference that I attended, I found that there was a hall of about 700-800 people. First 200 rows, the Chinese came and put their bags there. They said nobody else, because they had brought in such huge delegations. There were only Chinese there. And there were at least, what, maybe 15 of these Russian provinces. The governors had come at that point of time. And each one was pursuing the Chinese, that they will bring in maybe some connectivity, maybe some investment, maybe some mining. And I was a part of a panel in which some of these people from Moscow were there. And I found this something which I had not expected, that these governors were fighting with the central government, that you're doing nothing there, but the Chinese can do something, so let the Chinese come. So I think when the Chinese come in, so the Indian interest also grows. So the point I'm making is that we have seen Arctic, which is of course geopolitically has always been a very sensitive region. Even when it was frozen during the Second World War, etc., we know the flights that take place, the tension between Norway and Russia, and that they settled some maritime boundaries. Now you have the hydrocarbons, all that you have probably have already discussed. So there is going to be this geopolitics of Arctic is going to, as the ice melts, it also will be partly lead to the hotting up of the geopolitics. This is unavoidable. And the fact that Russia and US, the relationship is at its nadir. Between Russia and Europe, relationship is at its nadir. And for Russia to regain its greatness, I think it is already showing signs that it is focusing on the development of the northern regions, which is really all the permafrost area and also the adjoining the Arctic. And there, when China talks about, I think they're already talking about Arctic, something like a Arctic BRI. What is it called? They call themselves a near Arctic country, and they have an Arctic Silk Route, Polar Silk Route. So this is in Chinese interest, and I think they will do it. And the Russians, of course, the West has made sure that Russia and China come together on hundreds of issues, and they are coming together, despite the fact that Russia-China relationship is not going to be necessarily always very close. But this is the current reality. So Chinese are there, and the tensions between the East and the West are so very and hard and going to become harder, that Arctic will remain a geopolitical hotspot. Of course, the Arctic Council tries to keep it out, but more it keeps it out, these tensions and geopolitics, the more it's going to be discussed, because there is no bar on others discussing and talking about it. So I don't want to go into that, but I'm sure you have all discussed this. So that is one reason why we should be interested, the geopolitics of it. The second, of course, is the scientific pillar of our, we have already been there. We have been Himadri Station, etc. We have all been doing that research. And the link between climate change and the Himalayan glacial melts, the sea level rise, the changes in the monsoon patterns, these are very complex issues. And these need to be studied. And these cannot be studied, this will require global cooperation. It cannot be done simply because some university sitting here, etc. Because the regions are different, people are approaching this problem from different angles. I remember Earth Sciences had also organized some meetings. Professor Winters, I think, had come from Tromsø. He's a physicist and he's part of the IPCC panel. And he told us about, and I think India has that capability of being into an Arctic science research, polar research, but let me just at the moment focus only on the Arctic, and the climate change research. It has the abilities and it has the compulsion. So we must do that. But what we have not done is, while we are engaged in this scientific activity, but this has not been scaled up. So I think Earth Sciences, I mean, all credit to the Earth Sciences, and because they at least had some institutional way of dealing with it, because they were doing it in the Antarctica, so they kind of transplanted it into the Arctic, and as a result we could carry on something. And even today, if you look at the official statements of our officials at these various meetings, 90% of this is only deals with the scientific research. But we must, so two things. We must upgrade this science research. That means there should be more research in our own universities, centers of excellence, etc. The second is that we must step out of this narrow confine of the scientific research. It is very important, but we must go into the other domains, political, economic, and maritime, and many other domains like that. So this is, I think, what our policy in Arctic policy would look like. So we need to have an integrated policy, and this would, the policy is not there as yet, but I think the elements of such a policy are now visible. One is that since Arctic Council offers us only a limited scope, so we must increase our engagement and dialogue with a variety of institutions outside the Arctic Council. Now, of course, yours is one of the institutions. That's, I think, a very good platform, and I'm sure there are many other countries who are doing it. Russia does it. Russia also has 2 or 3 Arctic Council platforms, and there may be others also. Canada probably has it. So we must now start engaging with this major Arctic platforms, and there are quite a few of them, and it has increased. When 2017, when I last engaged with this topic, I think there were already about 6 or 7, but there may be more now. So we must engage with these platforms on various topics, whether it's political, economic, or geopolitical, or scientific, or academic exchanges, etc. So that is one. Secondly, I think we should also, at the official level, with each of these Arctic countries and those who are interested in Arctic, we must bring Arctic as a talking point every time we do it. So as we were discussing, that for each country we should have a plan. And depending upon the willingness, I know Norway was of great help to us when they got us into the Arctic Council as an observer. They helped a lot, and Norway, we have also interacted. I think they're very positive about it. I think Russia is certainly very positive about it, and Iceland, Finland, etc. We should also, so each of these countries, and US, Canada also, but each of these countries, and depending upon the interest, we should make out country-wise programs. Of course, then there are some very specific areas. Today we are talking about minerals. Now, I know that it's easy to talk about minerals, but it's not very easy to really take forward a collaboration very much, because it's very expensive. But nevertheless, I think because today India is in the need of strategic minerals, and particularly Iceland has a lot of minerals, Russia has a lot of minerals, So let us get into again a focused program of see how we can engage with them on this area. So Russia, Greenland, these are very important countries. Then of course hydrocarbons. We already have some kind of a fledgling kind of a collaboration between Rosneft and the ONGC. I think on the Yamal LNG terminal there is some equity, etc. that we are taking. But this we should take forward. Now it may not be possible for India to put equity, but I think why not? It should be possible also, depending upon, these are difficult areas. But nevertheless, I think in the context of, joining them in other aspects of, if not just exploration, but other aspects of hydrocarbons exploitation, that we should collaborate. Then we have science and technology I mentioned. We should really deepen it further. You see, sustainable development. I heard him when you talked about indigenous communities. I think this is a very great area because we have a huge experience in sustainable development, in looking at community development programs. We also have now gained a lot of experience on SDGs. Some of it, because if you look at the Arctic Council papers, there is a huge focus on indigenous communities. Because many feel that it is the indigenous communities who own this area, and their culture, etc., has to be protected and so on. And they are very happy if you can collaborate with them in some of these areas. So I think some experience, exchange of experience and so on, which is focused on the development of indigenous communities, the local cultures, etc., this will be acceptable to the Arctic countries because they won't think that you're coming and taking away the resources and so on. And we also have an experience, and we in the process may also learn a lot. So this is also very important. So I think sustainable development, indigenous communities, and since we have experience, we should get it on that. Then I think there are some few other areas like space cooperation. Now, I have my own feedback is that the Indian space agencies, our satellite, now we have a huge number of satellites, we're collecting a whole lot of data. The data which is collected by ResourceSat, and we have, this lot of data is being collected, this might be useful to the people of the, so we can even offer it free. So this is a huge information that we can offer. And what we might like in return is that Indian, the ISRO, etc., they require some downloading stations at the higher latitudes. So for instance, if we have a downloading station in Norway or Russia or Canada or someplace like that at 60, 70, 80 degrees, then you can get much more data. So I think some kind of a collaboration where we get downloading rights, that means a collaboration, and the data that can be shared, and this data could be, search and rescue, which is a very important aspect of Arctic Council working, and many other areas, scientific research. So this, I think, should be built, and it's very easy to build. It requires no money. It only requires basically MOU. Very little money is required. But we have not yet started focusing on this and made it as a point for, in our foreign policy. So I think ResourceSat data can be shared. Then you have maritime. I think on the maritime side, I just like to make a couple of comments. And Parmar is here. He may have already probably said it. And so Vijay is also here. You see, I have always felt that, Indian seafarers, what Arctic countries require are the skills. Where are the skills? They don't have enough populations. Now, they probably, as the routes open, you will require more and more seafarers, people who take the ships and all that services that they provide. This is a good chance for India because Indian seafarers are well known. So I think they should be trained in those skills, and they should be and those trainings can be done here or in these countries, and it could be collaborations. So that is one part of it. And then examine collaboration opportunities for building ice-class vessels. We have an Indian Register of Shipping, they may develop rules in accordance with the IMO mandated polar code for shipping. So if we get into this, this would help provide business to Indian shipyards, shipbuilding, and create numerous jobs through ancillary industries and such like. So on the maritime side, I think we should look at this. On the security side, since we have a very good collaboration, we have a relationship with the countries like Russia, even Norway, I think we should, in the Indian Navy, this is where the Indian Navy should become a little bit more ambitious. And if I remember when your last 2016 doctrine or 15 doctrine came up, 15 strategy, we made this point at that point of also, that let Indian ships, Indian Navy acquire some ships which pass through those waters. And until you do that, collaborate with the Russians and be a part of their exercises, or even at an early level, maybe even at the level of sports. Now, as a result of some of this thinking, I think some of our naval officers did go and they spent about 15 days on some Russian ships, which were having some seminar, and they went from one point to another point in the Arctic or North Sea route, which was very useful. So I think there will be many ideas like this, and these are very concrete. And but the question remains is, who bells the cat? How do we do it here? Now, there are many agencies. I mean, as you can see, there will be at least a dozen agencies which would be interested in this, but how do we coordinate it? So my take on this is that perhaps it is the National Security Council which should take charge of this. Because A, it works with the Prime Minister. It's a national security advisor. The Arctic has very strong security dimensions. Arctic has a very strong scientific dimension, and it also has an economic dimension, maybe a little bit less, but it is there. So these are the issues which are very much fall into the ambit of the National Security Council. So if the National Security Council can try and bring these together, then I think we can have a policy. And I'm happy that some meetings have already taken place very recently, and probably they are looking in this direction. But in the meanwhile, we shouldn't wait just for the government. Of course, government should know. But engagement with track 2 and track 1.5, that should begin immediately. And if there is yet again an offer from the Arctic Circle and other people to showcase India's capabilities, etc., and show India's presence, that we should take it. So I think with those, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arvind. Thank you for those comments. And one of the things we intend to do is to summarize all the, I hope at some stage we bring out a volume of proceedings, but before that, summarize some of the principal recommendations. And you weren't here in the morning, but one of the points which His Excellency Mr. Grimsson made was that the Arctic, where India is concerned, that the Arctic is too important now only to be left to scientists. The scientists, of course, have to play a leading part, but it is something which other wings and other ministries of the government also have to be involved in. But all that has been discussed at some length, and one person who has been a very patient listener throughout the day has been Mr. Dagfinner Swan Bodson, and his profile is in the program booklet. He's CEO of the Arctic Circle, so I won't read the profile out in the interest of time, but will request him now to make the valedictory address at the closure of this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Having, as noted, sitting patiently throughout the proceedings and listened, I think it's not necessary for me to survey the many dimensions of collaboration between within the Arctic, or the way in which the Arctic and India and the Himalaya region relate and have for decades in terms of scientific collaboration and diplomatic relations as well. I would like to, if I may, simply step back and tell you about the story of the way in which the story that preceded the establishment of the Arctic Circle and the engagement of President Grimsson and myself with the Himalaya region before 2013 and the way in which this process has evolved, and how, in my view, it offers many reasons for optimism, and also lessons and implications that present opportunities that should not be missed as we go ahead. So, 10 or 15 years ago, when the scientific research and affairs of the Himalaya Third Pole region were being discussed in the context of climate change, it was generally referred to as the white spot. That is how it was referred to in a report by the United Nations Environment Program in 2012. And as David Molden noted in his speech this morning, in the IPCC report in 2007, there was the mountains and the Himalaya region were seen as a gap. And that was also the case with the IPCC report in 2014. And therefore, in a decade ago or so, when President Grimsson and I visited the Institute of Tibetan Plateau Research for the first time in 2010, it also turned out that research of the so-called Third Pole region, which as the Chinese called it, were at that time quite limited. And the research was even more limited, and glaringly so, on the southern side of the Himalaya mountain range. And the number of Indian glaciologists was alarmingly small. But in the forums that were organized to address these issues at that time, one of them was called the Third Pole Environment Program, with whom we collaborated closely in the early years. And then the whole emphasis was always on increased scientific research, and simply about the lack of data and the lack of engagement with the issues. And the Third Pole Environment Program organized one of its early meetings in Iceland at the invitation of President Grimsson and the University of Iceland, and also a meeting which was organized in India in 2013 in collaboration with the Government of India and the Vijay Institute of Himalayan Geology. Along with this process emerged the idea of taking the discussion beyond science, because these issues and the Third Pole regions and the implications of climate change and consequences in the region was too important to leave only to the scientists, to use a phrase that was used just minutes ago. And it would be worthwhile and important to bring in representatives of the policy making and political authorities and establishments, and also representatives of non-governmental institutions and civil society and so on. And there would have to be an explicit intention of, or paying attention to communicate the message, not only to the policy-making communities, but also to make it available in the public realm, because that's also a way of making the message salient for the political and policy-making authorities. And therefore, as a result of these meetings, which first of them was convened in Iceland at the, as you could say, on the sidelines of the first Arctic Circle Assembly in 2013, bringing together representatives from across the Third Pole region, from India and China, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Myanmar, to Iceland to deliberate on this very issue. And the second meeting that was in this series, which we will call the Himalaya Third Pole Circle, was convened in Bhutan in 2015 in collaboration with the Royal Government of Bhutan and His Majesty the King. And again, the central theme of these meetings was the need to engage not only in pure scientific research on the glaciers and the water resources, but also to engage in systematic efforts to make that message of the kind that could be easily communicated to the international community and the political establishments. And so therefore, it has been extremely encouraging and offered many reasons for optimism that the Hindu-Kush Himalaya assessment was published last year. And I should emphasize that the meetings in both Iceland and Bhutan were organized in collaboration with ICIMOD. And so therefore the idea of engaging in the work preparing, leading up to the Hindu-Kush Himalaya assessment, you could argue, had important parts of the beginning of that idea did at least take place in these meetings. And as they say in the early parts of the report, or in the assessment report, that the document was very much inspired by work that had been performed in the Arctic, not only scientific research, but also the way in which scientific research and communications in the Arctic is designed and organized. And as they say, to quote directly, that the assessment derives inspiration from the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, which has systematically generated meaningful data and analysis about key trends and future scenarios on environment and natural resources in the Arctic region. And the product of this work is the Hindu-Kush Himalaya assessment, which received great attention in the international media at the end of last year, at the end, or a little bit more than a year ago, that is to say. And I think listening to David Molden this morning presenting basically the findings or key aspects of the Hindu-Kush Himalaya assessment, and listening to him telling us that they are now engaged in a systematic follow-up effort to present the findings and to engage with the policy-making authorities in the respective countries across the region, is a very encouraging new development and a state of affairs that is very dramatically far removed from the early beginnings of much more than 5 or 6 years ago. So this is to remind us that progress is being made, and there are very encouraging, great, innovative work being done. And on this note, so if I may, because if the challenge is to communicate the message and to encourage collaboration in the Third Pole Himalaya region, the Arctic also, as has been noted before, offers very important lessons and inspirations in that context. And I think it's worth emphasizing or emphasizing the need in this exercise in the coming years to create a multi-layered kind of institutional structure to not only convey information but also to address challenges. And so therefore, as in the Arctic at the moment, there is the Arctic Council, which is a formal diplomatic platform, which, as President Grimsson has noted, is relatively is very formal and rigid in terms of what it can actually do, and there are also very profound restrictions on what kind of issues they may address and what they may, in the first place, talk about. And so that, therefore, one of the observations which led up to the establishment of the Arctic Circle was there was a need for an institutional framework or a venue or platform where it would be possible to address new challenges that the old institutional mechanisms were simply not able to address and not designed to address or deal with. And so therefore I think that is something the policymakers and those who are engaging in conveying scientific findings and and important information about environmental challenges in the third pole Himalaya region need to keep in mind. That is to say, not to close the reports up in relatively narrow confines, but rather be able to design ways in which the message can be delivered in an open and flexible manner. And if I may ask the video person to play a video, because this, at the end of this video is a speech delivered at the Arctic Circle Assembly in 2013 about the way in which the Arctic Circle cannot
This area we call the third pole area, which covers 5 million kilometers in area from Pamir, Karakoram, Himalaya, Tibetan Plateau region. All these areas, the elevation is higher than 4,000 meters by average. In the same time, this area provides water resources and ecosystem services for about 2 million people, mainly in the Asian areas. So most of the main big rivers in Asia, also the Central Asia, started from the third pole area. In last 30 years, there is a lot of evidence showing that the glacier is melting very fast, especially in the Himalaya region. We can see that most of the glaciers over Himalaya region is declining.
The Himalayan region is a region of incredible agrobiodiversity, but it is also one of the most eco-fragile regions of the world. It is also a region which houses among the poorest people in the world, but it also sustains livelihoods of as many as 3 billion people who live downstream of its rivers and are sustained by the irrigation that is provided by that water.
I'm here today to discuss an issue of concern to us all, an issue that impacts every person on Earth, especially those who live and work in the Arctic, and which is central to every sustainable development goal we have. The Arctic is melting. We all know it. We've all been talking about it and hearing about it.
Things are happening in the Arctic at a much faster pace than we thought. I read a study recently that says that by 2030, we will have a Arctic free of ice in the summer. That is the most aggressive projection that I've seen. But to be honest, I can't rule it out. And to think that as we stand here, or I stand here today and look into the future and say that within 12 years, we potentially will have no ice in the Arctic in the summer is incomprehensible.
So NASA put this together. It's the best visualization I've seen yet. And what it's showing is that over these last 4 decades, we have lost most of the reflective ice in the Arctic.
But if you talk about locations, it's in the mid-latitude. You have also a very similar process. We call that deep white because they are all covered by snow and ice. And it's also very similar to the North Pole because with the global warming, its warming rate is very similar to North Pole region. It's about twice as large as global average.
So the enormous significance of the Himalayan region is coupled with its extraordinary vulnerability, which demands from us a very new approach to understanding the relationship between environment and development. And it is therefore that we look upon the work that is being done in the Arctic region as a great source of inspiration and a great source of learning for us. It is this region which tells us that the imperative is for us to cooperate. The imperative is for us to recognize that this is one ecosystem and that one ecosystem nourishes all of us, irrespective of the boundaries that we have artificially created within it. And if we learn to respect the fact that this ecosystem does not recognize these boundaries, if we learn to recognize the fact that a new paradigm is required in our understanding of the possibilities of sustainable development in this region, then each one of us can begin to work together.
The beginning of the third pole, this TPE program established a very close relationship with Arctic Circle. In 2010 and 2016, the former president of Iceland, Mr. Grimsson, visited the Institute of Tibetan Plateau Research twice. He started and has been kept promoting the collaboration between TPE and Arctic Circle.
Because we believe that the kind of vision that the Arctic Circle represents, and this assembly, this unique assembly over the last few days represents, is precisely the kind of architecture that the Himalayan region desperately needs.
So the general message of this video is to say that the Himalaya region can benefit from a mechanism of engaging with and communicating information about the challenges that the region has faced, that is designed along the way in which the Arctic Circle and the Arctic in general has designed its way of addressing or engaging with the issues. And the general point is that some of these challenges and the nature of the information is of the kind that needs a relatively kind of high-profile platform where they can be communicated in an effective way beyond the diplomatic settings. But as a way of concluding, and in a short booklet I wrote about collaboration in the Third Pole Himalaya region, which was distributed earlier today, I outlined 4 elements of that a collaboration or effort in engaging in institution building of that kind would need to meet, at least. And as I see this as a challenge, as a very fascinating opportunity in a way, because environmental problems and challenges are often presented as classic variations of the collective action problem, where different agents have different kinds of informations and their interests are not aligned. And but the environmental issues and the issue of climate change and water challenges in the Himalaya region in particular it also offers unique opportunities in the sense that the quality of the science is rapidly improving and the clarity of the message is becoming ever stronger. And there are also already efforts to engage in collaboration and institution building to communicate this message more effectively than before. And so as I see it, it's a fascinating exercise in overcoming a collective action problem of a monumental scale. And the challenge before us needs to, and the institutional effort to engage in this, to meet this challenge should meet at least 4 criterions. It needs to address the need for collaboration on research, on economic, social, human, and cultural challenges presented by climate change. Secondly, it needs to improve the dialogue and information sharing between separate fields of science and expertise. And third, it needs to bring together national and regional leaders, policymakers, and officials, as well as scientists, experts, and representatives of the local populations and indigenous communities. Fourth, it needs to engage in publication of findings in reports that are accessible to a general readership as well as the political and policy-making communities. And fifth, it needs to create a venue to connect institutions, communities, and authorities from across the region with a particular focus on those most adversely affected by the retreat of the glaciers, the transformation of the water systems, and other consequences of climate change. And to conclude, I think we should all embrace the positive developments that have taken place in the last 10 to 15 years. The general environment is dramatically different than when we talked about this in 10 or 15 years ago. And the possibilities for addressing the issues in a constructive and informative way are absolutely unique, and I hope we all can participate in seizing that opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. With this, on behalf of the Indian Council of World Affairs, I thank our two speakers for the valedictory session, as well as our speakers and chairs for the other session. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we conclude the seminar. Thank you so much for your patience and for being here.
Getur verið eitthvað fram? Getur verið eitthvað fram?
Science and